What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Ryze Hoops. We are at the time of the year where we get to talk about the GHSA state playoffs. I am Simone Stanley. He is Carter Wilson, and we have three storylines to watch in the playoffs this year and three sleeper teams to watch. Carter, starting with the three storylines, what do we have to keep our eye on?
So I don't want to make anybody mad here. This is like the last thing that I want to do on one of these. But the first storyline, I think that 7A, I think it's a little bit of a lack of depth. Like that's kind of the storyline that I'm going to go with. I mean, you go back years or even back to last year. I think we had, a ton of teams that could have won it. And I think if you asked around kind of the basketball community here, you might get 4 or 5 different answers depending on it. And the thing is, like a lot of those teams, they fall into like the same quadrants. So if you look at it, obviously McEachern and Wheeler are going to be 2 of those teams, which could potentially match up in the Elite 8. And I think Newton and Norcross are 2 of the other teams, and they could also do the exact same thing and match up in the Elite 8. And then you have Grayson as the other one that I think you get a lot of answers for. So those 5 teams, I think, are the ones that, if you asked around, those are the teams that you get the most answers. Obviously, people would say here or there, one or the other. But I think just there is a little bit of a lack of depth. I think, we don't talk about like the transfers and all this. So you get like these kind of power teams. And it's kind of creating that in 7A where you have these like really, really good teams. And it kind of just, those first couple rounds can make them a little bit less interesting.
Yeah.
But I mean, you never know. You really never know. Something could happen in the first round and it could shock everybody. So I could be completely wrong, but that's just kind of the way that I see it this year. I think when we go back to kind of those power teams, I think you can also drop down to 5A and kind of look at the same thing. I think a lot of people are already kind of anticipating, hey, Kell versus Eagles Landing state championship. Like that's kind of how people are kind of looking at it already. I think if you look at the top left of 5A, I think it gets pretty interesting. And I think you have some teams there that could potentially make some noise. I mean, Tri-Cities is always super tough. Like, and they've been there before. They have guys that have been there before. Hiram has great guards. Tucker's good. Jones County even has, some really good guards. So in 5A, I think, while we're looking at that potential Eagles Landing, Kell state championship, I think one of those teams out of that top left, I think could potentially kind of steal the show maybe a little bit. So I do think that as we drop down, I think that depth problem in 7A kind of, it's not as apparent in those other ones. I think we have some really good ones. And then 6A, I think too, I think is the same thing. I think 6A is also really good. I think you have a ton of teams in 6A that can win it. We haven't talked a ton about Grovetown in 6A, which is weird because they're coming off a state championship. I mean, they started off on a real high and, out in Augusta, maybe people just kind of lost it, but they've kind of really gotten on track here these past few weeks and playing good basketball at the right time. And, you have other teams in 6A, you have St. Pius, you have Etowah, Jonesboro, Alexander. Like 6A is really deep. So I think that's a storyline too, is just the depth in 6A. I think if you asked a lot of people again, they might tell you that 6A is better than 7A just from a competition standpoint, which is really interesting.
Okay, so let's talk about some sleepers to watch in the tournament. We talked about a lot of the favorites, but what teams could shock the state?
The first team in 7A that really jumped out at me was Cherokee. I think the draw is very favorable. I think they have seniors. I think that they were kind of in one of those regions where they're battle tested. That the region that they were in had a ton of depth if you look at it. Just like every game was tough in that region. And I think when you have that kind of battle-tested team with seniors, they have a great backcourt. They have Cam Pope, Tayden Owens, Mason Bennett, and Daston Hart's really good in the front court and can really rebound. And he may not be the biggest guy on the court, but he's gonna prove some people wrong just by how hard he plays and what he can do. I think Cherokee's a team that could potentially make some noise here if they won a couple games at all. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And then if you drop down, I think Woodward Academy in 6A, I think is interesting. One of the 3 seeds in 6A. Deke Cooper is a guy that I feel like could make a lot of noise. He's one of the state's better sophomores. And he's a guy that I think could really make a name for himself here, and going into the travel season could be one of the guys to watch for. And then I've already talked about 5A, kind of that top left quadrant. It's kind of hard to call a 1 seed a sleeper team, but with all the eyes on Eagles landing in Kel, I think Hiram is an interesting team. Super interesting. Jay Boyd, we've seen him countless times during the travel season, fall league, and he's that guy, and he could be that guy to carry a team. But then they have this football presence that we kind of didn't get in our fall league, just with football happening, and Walter Matthews and Chase Tyler. It gives this team a ton of athleticism. They have Walter Matthews gives them size, and they already have great guards. So they're a team that I feel like could be a big time sleeper. They are a 1 seed, so I'll catch some slack for that, but I'm all right with it. I think that it's a team that not a lot of people are talking about.
Okay, well, Carter, I'm excited for the first round. I know you're excited. Everyone is. This was a great preview to look forward to. Games start Tuesday and Wednesday, so make sure you guys are tapped in here with Ryze Hoops, and especially RyzeHoops.com for in-depth coverage of the state playoffs. But I am Simone Stanley. He is Carter Wilson. Thank you guys so much for joining us.